What he had done was worse than any abuse. That's how big of a deal my husband, John, has caused. I've been taking care of your bedridden father, Robert, who's got dementia, while also doing all the housework by myself. And you didn't even help with the trash. You won't even have a decent conversation with me. Then one day, John shoved divorce papers in my face. Why? I don't get it. I yelled out my raw, honest feelings, and John sneered.
I'd rather be with someone like Catherine who is classy, sexy, and has everything you don't. I'm cutting ties with this broken family. I'm a rich man now.
Apparently, John had a younger lover who's a CEO of a company, and they're planning to run off together. How could he betray me like this? And not only did he say this to my face, but I was in Robert's room, and Robert, his own father, heard everything. John's packing up, leaving the house, and I can't go out and get a job that can support us, especially not with Robert here needing care. And I don't know a thing about social services. I'm in a real bind. I clung to Robert's bed, helpless. How on earth am I supposed to live without any income, taking care of bedridden Robert? As I was despairing, Robert, who's supposed to be suffering from dementia, burst out laughing. Robert?
I can't wait for the next shareholders meeting.
What? My name is Linda. I'm a 42-year-old housewife. I used to be a go-getter career woman, but when I married John, also 42, I decided to stay home. From the start, his parents liked me, and we all got along well. But despite John proposing that I stay home, we started to drift apart. He didn't understand my hobbies, and our personalities were complete opposites. I couldn't figure out why, but naturally, John and I grew distant. I had known John was having an affair even when his parents were still alive. What is this? John's phone is filled with women's names. If his parents found out about this. I kept it from his parents, but after his mother passed away. Robert was already bedridden with dementia, and the house was filled with caregiving supplies. Within a few days of the death of my mother-in-law, who loved me so much, John spoke up. At the time, I was by Robert's side.
I'm going to live with my lover, so let's get divorced. I'm cutting ties with this broken family. I'm rich now.
What about Robert? Are you just going to leave him like this? Do you really want to be with your lover that badly? He is your own father.
Shut up. Catherine's got way more classy and sexy than you. You're nothing but a poor, tacky woman with a sharp tongue and no real skills. I should have never married you. You tricked me into this. And now look, what a disappointment. You're just an old hag now. I should have married Catherine from the start. I just got the order wrong. Besides, caregiving is women's work, right? Why don't you just stay here and look after Dad since you don't have a home to go back to anymore? Well, go on. Have a little bonding time with Dad while I'm off living my best life.
I chased after John as he packed his things. He was stuffing clothes and work tools into his suitcase. He was completely set on leaving. That's when I lost it. Are you out of your mind, saying all that where Robert can hear you? He's the one who raised you. How can you toss him aside so easily, like an old candy wrapper? Don't you have any shame? You're worse than a dog.
What do you care? You're boring and we never agree on anything. And your gardening hobby? Total waste of money? I wanted to travel, but you said no because Mom was sick? You ganged up on me with Dad back then. The whole thing's just been a mistake from the start. I'm marrying Catherine. Gotta go meet her parents too. So yeah, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. Here's the divorce papers. I've already got my part filled out. Not like Dad's got any inheritance anyway. So good luck with him.
And with that, John walked out. I was in shock, frozen by how cruel his words were. I went back to Robert's room. Tears I couldn't hold back poured out, and I collapsed, clinging to Robert's bed. My life was ruined by a man like that. He's the kind of guy who doesn't feed the fish once he's caught them. He said all the right things when he proposed, but once we were living together, I became nothing but a nuisance. What has my life even been? It's unbearable. Robert was silent. He's got dementia now. I don't know what to do from here. Then suddenly, Robert started laughing again, louder this time. His laughter was so out of place, I jumped away from his bed. Robert?
I can't wait for the next shareholders meeting.
What do you mean? There shouldn't be a company anymore. Before Robert developed dementia, he used to run a small manufacturing business. But as far as I know, he's no longer the president. At first, I thought Robert was just rambling. But then, Robert gave me some instructions, and I peeked inside his dresser. Following his directions, I opened a drawer and moved some things aside. That's when I found a business card. Robert, there's a business card here. Who is this person? An old friend of yours?
For anything regarding that idiot, you should consult with this man. I'm not totally senile yet.
The name on the card read, George Murphy. I've never seen anyone by that name come to the house. I quickly reached out to this George fellow. As I clumsily explained the situation, George abruptly said and hung up.
I'll be over to your house right away.
While I waited, I kept busy with housework, and in less than an hour, a man who introduced himself as George arrived. He looked younger than Robert, but he still seemed to be in his 50s or 60s.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm George Murphy, and I used to be Robert's secretary.
I'm Linda, his daughter-in-law. Would you like to see Robert? I showed George to Robert's room. I had already told George about John's behavior.
Robert, what a horrible thing to go through, and at the hands of your own son, no less. It's disgraceful.
I left them alone for a bit. When George came back into the living room, he said,
Excuse me, Linda.
Yes, let me get you something to drink. I served him coffee and some pastries, and we started talking. I heard that Robert no longer owns the company.
When Robert was still active, I was his secretary. He handed the presidency over to me and became the chairman.
Robert was the chairman.
Yes, the company Robert founded was an elite team that could make any kind of part, and we worked with major corporations. Believe it or not, the company he started, which I now run, is actually quite well known. When John was still young, Robert hurt his leg, and that's when he passed the company to me.
I see, but now, without John, what are we supposed to do?
Don't worry, I can't provide care myself, but I'm well versed in caregiving and welfare services. Just follow my instructions from here on out. We're going to make sure John gets what's coming to him.
I followed George's reliable guidance. The first thing I did was find a home care company that could come to the house. It didn't take long to find a few options online. After discussing with a few, I chose a company to provide the care we needed. It turns out that neither John nor I knew this, but Robert's savings totaled several $1,000,000, and his account is still unfrozen. Once the care services were in place, I signed the contract, giving me more freedom to move around. Meanwhile, George held a shareholders meeting where he exposed both Robert's and John's actions to the investors. Rumors started spreading among the investors.
Have you heard? That company run by Catherine Brown, the young CEO, is in big trouble.
She ran off with Robert's son, didn't she?
I don't want to invest in a company like that.
I'm not interested in holding any of their stuff.
Honestly, that company is done. I can't stand places like that.
George explained that investors are very sensitive to gossip. Hearing the rumors, investors began selling off stock from Catherine's company. Her reputation as a young CEO took a massive hit. Just as George had planned, Catherine started running into financial trouble. On top of the affair, the company's reputation plummeted, and after a resolution to remove her as CEO, the board sued her for massive damages. Her company eventually went bankrupt, and she was forced to file for personal bankruptcy. One day, while the home care worker was here, John showed up at the house with a woman who seemed to be his mistress.
Hey, you did something, didn't you? Catherine's company is gone, and she's in serious trouble because of you, you coward.
John suddenly started shouting, but I didn't flinch. I replied calmly, giving him a cold stare. Yelling at the door, "Don't forget the neighbors can see you. Why don't you come inside if you want to talk, or do you want me to call the cops after you finish yelling?" I asked the home care worker to look after Robert and led John and the woman, who I assumed was Catherine, into the living room. I didn't offer them anything to drink, and the three of us sat at the table.
So, you're just leaving Dad, huh? After everything you've said, you're just going to leave him like that?
The home care worker is taking care of him. They're way better at it than I am, and more importantly, they understand people. So, what do you want? Didn't you say you were cutting all ties with us?
You did something to Catherine's company, didn't you?
Excuse me? What are you talking about? The young woman sitting next to John must be Catherine Brown. She glared at me, but I wasn't intimidated.
Catherine is a brilliant businesswoman. She made 2 or even 3 times my salary, and everything was going great. Then her company got hit by bad rumors. The board filed for damages. Her employees bailed on her, and she ended up bankrupt. You had to have done something. You've always resented us because we were doing well, so you must have secretly worked to destroy her company.
That's some imagination you've got there. I didn't do anything. What power does a stay-at-home wife like me have? You're just lashing out at me because you're upset. And by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers, so we're strangers now. Why don't you take your little girlfriend and leave, get any job, and pay off that debt you owe? If you can't, then I guess you'll just have to get used to being poor.
What did you just say?
Oh, John, now you're worried about your dad? You've got a wife but still managed to have a mistress, and I thought you might have turned a new leaf, but clearly the bad habits are still there.
Just then, George came into the living room. I had given him a spare key for emergencies.
Who the hell is this old man?
John, I've heard all about your behavior, and you must be Catherine Brown. I've been waiting to meet you. I'm sure you haven't forgotten the name George Murphy.
When George sat down next to me, Catherine started to look scared. Sensing there was more to this, I decided to ask, "George, do you know Catherine?"
Yes, she used to work as a clerk at my company, but she was actually a spy for a competitor. She stole confidential information and disappeared.
Oh, so Catherine's a thief. I deliberately used a tone that would provoke her. Catherine shot me a look of resentment, tears welling in her eyes.
You should be grateful I didn't file a police report, Catherine Brown. Now, John, this is my first time meeting you, but I've heard plenty from your dad. You caused a lot of trouble for your parents when you were a kid and never showed them any respect. Aren't you ashamed of yourself as a man?
Who the hell is this guy? And you, Linda? Are you into old men now?
Watch your mouth.
George's sharp rebuke had an impact like no other. Even I flinched a little.
You threw away a wonderful wife for a younger woman, and you're not ashamed? And you abandoned your parents. I heard you didn't even show up to your mom's funeral because you were at the casino. Oh, right. I forgot to introduce myself. I used to be your dad's secretary. Now, I'm the president of his company.
My dad's company? That's a lie. That company's been gone for years. Don't try to fool me. My dad told me himself. He doesn't have company anymore.
That's because your dad didn't want to hand the company over to you. You caused so much trouble in school and got arrested a bunch of times, and he didn't want such a person to succeed his company. I totally understand how your dad, Robert, felt. A man who abandons a loyal wife or a mistress isn't fit to be president of anything.
What did you say?
Oh, and I brought these for you too to sign. First, this one.
What is it? A pledge.
And then this one.
What the? A claim for damages. Why are we being sued for damages? We're the victims here. It's her fault. This woman did something to ruin Catherine's company.
I'm the one who brought down your company. Linda had nothing to do with it. Or do you just want to blame everything on her? By the way, your employees said Catherine ran the company like a tyrant. If you missed one day, you'd get 3 days pay docked, even if it was for the flu. When they quit, they had to sign a contract not to talk about the company. Your former company is known for things like that. People normally report it, but most just avoid dealing with your toxic business. It's basically a toxic workplace, right?
Catherine lowered her head. Seeing that she didn't deny it, it was clear that it was true. I was shocked by how exploitative Catherine's company was. I'd never heard of a place like that.
The amount for the damages has been formally estimated by our corporate attorney. There's no padding, and it's not going to be reduced.
But we don't have any income anymore.
John, aren't you working? Did you quit your job?
No. I quit to help Catherine with her company. But then the company started going downhill.
So, you quit your job, right? That was your decision. You'll still need to pay the damages.
What right do you have to say that? You're not a lawyer. Stop acting like you're so high and mighty. Who do you think you are?
Are you trying to insult my company's attorney, John? Since when did you get so important? Now you're going to sign this pledge as well. It's a promise that you'll pay the damages as an adult. You're not a kid anymore, so I'm sure you understand what this means, right, John?
Screw this, Catherine. Let's get out of here. We don't need to be here.
Yeah.
What a coward. He's trying to run from paying the damages and from signing the pledge. Just like a child, he doesn't even realize what he's done. After all the trouble he caused his parents, now he wants to run away again. John, is that how you're going to live your life? Just running away? Don't you think that's a pretty sad way to live? Do you want your life to be defined by running? Oh, and by the way, don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. Maybe Catherine here can handle that.
And Catherine, you stole our company's confidential information for your own benefit while we were left to suffer in silence. As a CEO, don't you care about your reputation? You wouldn't want people to say the boss was a thief, would you? Or would you prefer we make that theft public? We're fine with that if you want. Or you could just sign the pledge and get ready to pay the damages. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life dodging the media?
I'll sign the pledge.
Catherine, you don't have to do this. Don't let them intimidate you. We can start another company.
No. If I don't sign this, I'll be hounded by the media forever. I don't want that life. Besides, I really did steal the confidential information. If we get sued and more debt piles up.
With that, Catherine signed the pledge. I quickly took it from her before it could be torn up.
But we don't have any income. We can't make the payments.
That's your problem, not mine. What I need from you and Catherine is the promise to pay. If the payments get delayed, we'll just extend the period. That doesn't concern me. Now, John, sign the pledge too. What are you waiting for? You proposed to me, but you've done nothing but belittle me ever since. The food's bad, the ironing is sloppy, the cleaning and laundry are half done, and on top of that, I'm not thoughtful enough. I'm not your servant. Why should I listen to you like you're giving orders? And Catherine Brown, this guy is the type to stop feeding the fish once he's caught it. Sure, he's treating you well now, taking you shopping, maybe even buying you designer bags. But once you marry him, all of that will be gone. He's only good in the beginning. You might feel like a princess now, but you'll soon realize it's all an illusion.
I'd never do that. It's all in your head. You're just jealous of Catherine. Catherine, don't listen to her. She's just trying to tear us apart. And this damages amount? It's a lie anyway.
Are you still going on about that? I never thought you'd be such a scumbag. I used to doubt all the bad things I heard about you, but now I see they're true.
Now, sign the pledge, promise to pay, and get out of here. I don't have time to waste on you two. John, sign the pledge now. John glared at me but eventually signed the pledge. He was probably just eager to leave. I kicked both John and Catherine out of the house. It was about time to start preparing Robert's dinner. George, thank you so much. I feel so much better now, and I really appreciate it. I wouldn't have been able to do anything on my own, and I was so lost with Robert.
No need to thank me. I'm just glad I could see Robert again. And if the damages payments get delayed, or if anything else happens, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll go with you to follow up on it.
George smiled warmly as he spoke. After George and the home care worker left, I spoke to Robert. Thanks to George, we'll be getting the damages. Thank you, Robert, for introducing me to him. Robert was lying in bed, seemingly asleep, but I thought I saw a little smile across his face. 2 months later, the damages payments started coming in, likely from some job John had found. I'd been scraping by on savings, so having a steady source of income gave me peace of mind. But soon, the payments started becoming irregular. Sometimes they came in monthly, sometimes every other month. It wasn't consistent. I worried that at this rate, my savings might run out. But the payments weren't so delayed that it seemed suspicious, and I had no idea where John and Catherine were living now. I didn't know what to do, so I called George.
Is that so? Are the payments unstable?
Yes, but it's not like they've stopped entirely, so I'm unsure of how to proceed.
Let's go to see John once. I know where he's staying. Let me help you as a way of repaying Robert.
Thank you so much. A few days later, I arranged with a home care worker to be away from home for an extended time. I intended to collect the damages from John and Catherine, but I also wanted to see how they were living. They were staying in a run-down apartment that looked like a disaster zone. After explaining the situation to the landlord and getting her permission to enter, we found no one home. However, the place was piled high with trash, like a complete hoarder's house. There was a terrible smell too.
This place reeks. I never should have rented to them.
The landlord looked completely disheartened. I couldn't blame her. If it were me, I'd have kicked them out for how filthy it was.
Looks like they're not here.
Maybe they're out working?
They'll be back soon.
Both George and I were taken aback by the landlord's confidence. How do you know that?
Those two work during the day at the grocery store and at night at a nightclub. I've overheard things because they always fall behind on rent.
George, what should we do?
Ma'am, would you mind if we waited in the parking lot? We'll stay in the car.
Sure, go ahead. I was thinking about collecting rent from them myself soon anyway.
With the landlord's permission, George and I waited for John and Catherine. Just as he said, they soon arrived. They looked exhausted, walking with hunched backs and gloomy expressions as they entered the apartment. It was strange to me that they were working so hard but still falling behind on payments. George and I went straight to John's place. We knocked on the door. We stayed silent so they wouldn't recognize our voices.
Who is it?
It was Catherine who answered.
Oh,
Looks like you're behind on rent again.
what do you want? We're working ourselves to the bone. We don't have any money for you.
You're working 2 jobs, one at a supermarket and one at a nightclub, yet you still don't have money. What are you spending it on, living in a dump like this? Catherine pulled out her wallet and shoved $100 at me.
This is all I've got. Now leave.
She looked like someone on the edge, desperate.
Let's go for now. This won't get us anywhere. I'll dig into this and get back to you. Go home and wait with Robert.
George drove me home, and I thanked the home care worker before returning to Robert's care. Later, George discovered that John had been wasting money at casinos. Catherine was involved in something close to prostitution. Prostitution? John's making her do that? What kind of man is he, treating a woman like that? George and I decided to contact the police. It turned out Catherine was working at an illegal brothel, and John was growing marijuana in the apartment's bathroom. Naturally, they were both arrested, and their story even made the evening news. John and Catherine were charged. Their lawyer pleaded for a reduced sentence, but it wasn't granted. Catherine cried as she left the courtroom after the trial.
What did I do wrong? I worked so hard to pay off the damages. What's so wrong with that?
John, on the other hand, stormed out of the courtroom, yelling like a madman. As I watched from the gallery, I felt sorry for Catherine and ashamed that I had ever been married to John. I wouldn't be receiving the damages after all, but with George's help, I managed to get my life back on track.
Please let me repay the kindness Robert showed me. He always treated me so well. Back when not everyone could go to college, I started working straight out of high school. Robert was always kind to me, even though I was just a kid. He'd tell me to pay attention and learn the jobs, and when I grew up, he hired me as his secretary. I'll always be grateful to him.
I think Robert would be pleased. Really, thank you. Robert and I lived modestly and quietly, without any luxury. 2 months later, Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep. He died while I was away for just a moment, using the bathroom. I held a small funeral and prayed with George. Robert was so kind to me. He was a truly good man. My mother-in-law was the same.
That's wonderful. It's a blessing, though I'm sure he was pained by how his son turned out. Robert often said that his son was a disappointment.
Yes, John really was a disappointment. Robert didn't deserve that. George and I talked like that. Even in death, Robert's presence was strong, and without him, the family home felt eerily quiet. Before she passed away, my mother-in-law secretly changed the house title to my name, so I was able to stay and live in a place filled with memories. I went to visit John and Catherine once. John's mental state had deteriorated, so I couldn't see him. When I saw Catherine, she had no trace of elegance left, even though she was in her 30s. She looked like an old woman. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her skin was in terrible condition.
You were right.
When I tried to speak, Catherine started sobbing.
John's exactly what you said. Once we got married, his whole personality changed, and I worked like a slave. You were right all along.
I had no response, and that was the end of the visit. Later, I inherited Robert's estate, but since it was a large sum of money, I no longer needed George's financial support. The paperwork for the inheritance taxes was a headache, but now I'm living peacefully. John and Catherine are still in prison. I never asked about their prison terms because I was not interested in them. Catherine, though still young, was likely tormented by John. It's a sad story. She founded a publicly traded company, but ended up in prison. John probably had a gambling addiction. I hope he's trying to get better now, but I've heard that gambling addiction is incredibly difficult to overcome once it's that severe. At one point, before he proposed, he seemed like a normal guy. But as soon as we got married, we couldn't agree on anything. He may never get out of prison. But now, I'm finally free. I miss my in-laws, but not having to deal with John is a huge relief. I have enough money to live modestly without worrying about food. But I like having something to do, so I've taken a part-time job as a cashier. And just like that, I found happiness.